Hey Hermits, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Dara and today I'm going to be wrapping up all of the books I read in March. I'm going to be pretty chill about it though. I'm sat here with my cup of tea and my blanket and we're just going to talk through the things that I've read this month. Right off the bat, I want to say this month has felt kind of like crap. I have felt like I've been in such a reading slump for most of this month, and yet somehow I've read a whole lot of books. I've read like, I don't know, 17 books, is that right? Yeah, 17 books. Despite feeling for at least half of the month like I just wasn't reading anything and everything was really slumpy and gross and I was hating everything. I think potentially it's because in January and February I had stellar reading months. I read 12 books in January and 12 books in February, and both months I found like a solid handful of 5-star all-time favourite reads. And then I started March and had a whole bunch of not necessarily duds, but things that were sort of like just okay. And I don't know, it just made me feel less excited about the world of books, which sucks because the world of books is my favourite place to be, let's be real. Anyway, let's dive into what I actually read this month. Like I said, there are 17 books to go through, so we want to get moving. I'm not going to give an in-depth synopsis of each book just because there are so many, but I will give you my sort of overall feelings. I think a lot of these I've mentioned in reading vlogs anyway, so you could potentially be hearing more about those, but I'm terrible at posting my reading vlogs. I record them all the time and then just never bother editing and uploading them, so you may at some point hear more thoughts on these books, but we'll see. Okay, the first book I read in the month of March was All You're Perfect by Colleen Hoover. Now, I'll admit I'm a Colleen Hoover fan. I've never not read one of her books in a single sitting. Like, they're just very readable to me. The chapters are always very short, they're always very compelling, there's always lots of drama, and that's really the equation that keeps me reading. So I did enjoy it. It was probably one of the more uncomfortable Colleen Hoover books that I've read so far, just because the topic was a little bit more personal to me. And that's not to say that like others of her books that I've read haven't connected with me on a personal level, but it's more like something that I've been dealing with more recently. So if you don't know what this is about, it is about this couple who have been married for many years and they've been really struggling with fertility issues, and those fertility issues have ultimately broken down their marriage. And you're hearing two parallel stories, one from when they fell in love and one from when the relationship is breaking down. And because fertility is something that I've had a lot of trouble with, it wasn't the same like fun dramatic time as some of her other books have been. But that's not to say I didn't enjoy it. I still read it in one go. I really liked how it ended. I loved the characters. Like, it was a good book. It was just less like silly dramatic fun than some of the others. The next book that I read was a poetry collection. So this called The Sun Will Rise and So Will We by Janae Cecilia. If you see me looking over there, it's because I've got my Goodreads open on my computer so that I can make sure that I'm getting everything right. And I'll be honest, I wasn't that impressed by it. It's hard because poetry is so subjective, and I feel like the best poetry is that which really speaks to you, so it makes you feel something. And this just didn't make me feel anything. I can't say it was objectively bad. Like, I can't say like, oh, the pacing was bad or the rhythm was bad or the vocab was shoddy or the structure was this, or like, it's not that. It's just nothing spoke to me. It felt a little bit trite. It felt a little bit like a collection of like empowering Instagram quotes. Like, it didn't feel like it just had substance, which I think is what I would usually look for in poetry. Like, I want to feel the feelings when I'm reading poetry. After that, I actually read another poetry collection. This one was a little bit different because rather than being by one single author, it was a collection by many poets edited by James cruise, and that was The Path to Kindness, Poems of Connection and Joy. And even though it was different, I felt kind of the same. Like I think there was one poem that really spoke to me, and that one was about like this melancholic kind of relationship. Like they'd been together for decades, and it was kind of like their definition of love as an older couple. And that poem, for some reason, like really made me feel something. But the rest, I was kind of like, it's fine. I wouldn't read it again. Like it was, I don't know. I just don't think this one was for me. I don't think this one was for me. No, sorry. And that's a shame, because actually a lot of the poetry that I've been reading recently has been so good. And then after reading these two back to back, it's put me off reading poetry for a while. So I don't think I actually read any other poetry in the month, apart from one novel in verse, but no other poetry collections, which is sad because I was having such a poetry moment. Anyway, next I read Down to My Soul by Kennedy Ryan, and this is the second book in the Soul series by Kennedy Ryan. And here is the thing. I love Kennedy Ryan's writing. I absolutely love it. She is definitely one of my very favourite romance authors at this point. Cannot get enough of her work. That series specifically, I'm just not the biggest fan. So it's set in the same world as the Grip series, which for me was like a 10 out of 5 star series. So the reason that I picked up the Soul series is because it's the same like group of friends, it's the same world, it's all of that stuff is the same. And I wanted more of my Grip characters. But honestly, I just didn't like them as much in the Soul series. And it's interesting because the Soul series was actually written first. So the characters from the Grip series in the Soul series haven't got together yet. So the main guy in the Soul series is the twin brother of the main girl in the Grip series. And one of my biggest issues was the way he thought about and spoke about her, because I got so attached to her in the Grip series. I was like, this guy's an asshole. He doesn't deserve to have this epic love story. No, thank you. And I don't know, like it didn't speak to me in the same way. That's not to say it was bad. Like I still sat there and read it in one go. Like it was an enjoyable book. I just I didn't get the 5-star feeling like I did with Grip, I'm sorry to say. Next, I read Sense and Sensibility. And so I say I read it, I finished Sense and Sensibility next. I actually started reading it back in February. Did I? Or was it in January? God, it might have been in January actually. Because I'm buddy reading all of Jane Austen's books this year, and Sense and Sensibility was the book for January and February. And I was actually listening to the audiobook. I started reading it physically, but then I do have access to some really great BBC adaptations, so I thought I would just listen to it because I wasn't moving along as quickly as I'd like. But I finished that, had a really good time listening to that. It's a reread for me. Love Sense and Sensibility, especially the film adaptation. It was one of my favourite films growing up. And it's devastating to me that I've searched all of the streaming platforms and cannot find it. And my DVDs are in the attic at the moment because we're redecorating. So I haven't been able to rewatch the film, and I really want to. But love it. Definitely looking forward to carrying on with that buddy read. Our next book is Pride and Prejudice, which I know is most people's favourite. It's not mine. But I do still enjoy it, so I'm looking forward to it. The next book I read, so this is... Now we're getting to the point where Careedathon started. So I took part in Careedathon, which was a reading challenge that centralises Korean authors and literature, hosted by Monica Kim and Books with Chloe. I did film a vlog, but as is my way, didn't edit it or post it. And so I will talk you through those books now. So first up from my Careedathon part of March was Angel and Hannah by Ashley Yee Park. yeah, I was doubting myself there, whether that was her name or not, but it is. It is. Goodreads say so. So this book, it's really, really short, and it is a novel written in poems. And I called it a novel in verse before, and that doesn't feel accurate because it's not like one long novel written in verse. It's actually like a series of poems that tell this cohesive story, and it's a retelling of Romeo and Juliet set in the early 90s in New York. And it's this love story between a Korean girl and a Hispanic boy, and they live in very different environments and they have like very different upbringings, but they just have this connection. And it is so sad, it is so tragic. It really I mean, I know that it's based on Romeo and Juliet, and Romeo and Juliet is sad, but I wasn't expecting it to be that level of sad. And while I would say that it was immaculately written, it honestly, like, I could not fault the writing. It was beautifully done. It just made me feel so unsettled and miserable that I couldn't call it a 5-star read. But it is one that I would definitely be recommending to anyone who will listen to me. It was very, very well done. And I just think it was a really brilliant and smart reinterpretation of one of Shakespeare's most popular plays. So the next book that I read for Readathon was Love in the Big City by Samyong Park. And I believe this one's actually been nominated for the International Booker Prize. I think that list was released fairly recently. And this, like, it wasn't what I expected. So if you read the back of the book, it sounds very much like it's going to be this fun, light, dramatic story about this young gay man living in Seoul and his female best friend, and they're out in the town drinking, living large, loving lives, and getting into all kind of escapades. And that's not really accurate. So that's true of maybe a quarter of the book, but really it's showing us these 4 separate vignettes of our main character's life. The first of which is living large with his girly friend in Seoul, but the rest are later on in his life when he's going through different things and dealing with his different relationships. So I just feel like that wasn't communicated very well in the way it was described. I mean, it was good, it just wasn't as light and funny as I was expecting. It was funny in like a dry, witty, irreverent kind of way, but it wasn't quite the comedy that I was expecting. There were definitely a lot of hard moments, there were a lot of gritty moments. Yeah, I was expecting it to be quite a light read. I thought it was going to be a bit of a palate cleanser because the other books that I picked for Readathon were all quite dark and challenging and upsetting. And so after reading Angel and Hannah and Love in the Big City back to back, I was just like, I need a break. Because those were supposed to be my more like fun selections and the rest were then my more serious ones. But because the fun ones ended up being a lot more serious than expected, I was just like, I can't, my emotional health can't take it right now. So I actually ended up not reading 2 of the books that I picked for Readathon, so I'll just read those at a future time. There is one more Readathon book that I will get to you later, but I'm going in order of books read. So next me and the dogs, we read Refrain by Kennedy Ryan. So that is the 3rd in the trilogy, or the Soul trilogy that I mentioned earlier. I don't have an awful lot to say about that one. It was more novella-sized, it was shorter, but it was like the conclusion of the love story between Reese and Kai. I lost her name for a moment. Again, like, it was okay. Like, I don't know. I think maybe because they're some of Kennedy Ryan's earlier books, she just hadn't honed her unique magic that she brings to other things that I've read by her. But it was fine. Like, there was nothing wrong with it. Objectively, it was fine. Next, I read The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. So I actually watched the film first. So I watched the film. enjoyed the film, thought, do you know what, I'm just going to read the book. Like I actually put off reading it for such a long time because it was so hyped and I'd heard people talk about it and rave about it, and when I hear people talk about books like that, I'm very much like, whatever. I don't tend to be drawn towards things that everybody thinks is popular. Like that's always been the case. Like me as like in my past like emo kid life, like I could not be associated with anything that was too popular, you know. I have self-respect, and I think that has seeped into my reading as an adult. Anyway, The Hating Game. I watched the film, enjoyed it, read the book, enjoyed it so much that I watched the film again like right after, and it was funny, it was a good time, it was a light read. There were definitely things in... It's interesting having watched the film first and then read the book, because I had this view of things that the film did better, and like I thought there were certain things in the book that could have used tightening up. And I know that that's not a popular opinion, because I've seen most people talk about it the other way around, saying that there were important things that the film didn't do, but I actually disagree. Like I think that was fine. One thing that I was disappointed by from both is I feel like our main character grew up on a strawberry farm, and just the way it's talked about, like I feel like I would have liked to see a scene or two set at the strawberry farm. Okay, like it's such a irrelevant comment, I know, and it's such an unnecessary addition, but how often do we see a strawberry farm as a setting for something? I just think that sounds adorable, and it should have been taken advantage of, in my opinion. But all in all, like, it was enjoyable. You already know what that one's about. You don't need me to tell you. It was a fun weekend read. Then I read Heartstopper Volume 1 by Alice Oseman. So I don't want to badmouth Heartstopper because I would probably get lynched. And it's not even that I want to badmouth it. I didn't think it was a bad book. I just think that I don't like graphic novels. That's the issue. And it's not that I didn't like it. It's just, I always feel like graphic novels are lacking. Like I just don't get invested in them. I don't know. I'm not that bothered about graphic novels. I feel like if that same story was told in like a written novel format, I'd have loved it. But I don't know, I can't get my emotions in the mix when it's a graphic novel because there's just so little to work with, unfortunately. But it was a nice story. It was cute. Like the art was cute. Like I don't have any issues with it. It just didn't really like get to me in the way that I thought it would based on what I've heard other people say about it. Then we're moving on to more Kennedy Ryan from what is quickly becoming a Kennedy Ryan fan account. Long Shot by Kennedy Ryan. So this is the first book in the Hoop series. This one, 10 out of 5 stars. Loved it. Loved it. Loved it. Loved it. It was so good. The characters were impeccable. The plot was perfect. The like sexy scenes, they were well done. And the drama, like everything about it was so good. Something that Kennedy Ryan does really, really well is she weaves villains into her romance novels, and that's not something you see very often. Like sometimes you might have like a sort of casual nemesis trying to cause trouble, or a third party creating some kind of miscommunication issue, but you don't see like hardcore villains. But she has them, and she has them done very, very well. I will say in Long Shot, there are things that you would need to look at in terms of trigger warnings, because there are some things that are very explicitly described that are very challenging to read. I would just say, like, if you have triggers that you're aware of, look up the content warnings for Long Shot. But honestly, I thought it was an immaculately done book. I thought it was so good the way everything was handled. just felt perfect. And then I, right after, read Blockshot, which is book number 2 in the Hoop series. And this one I loved less, but it wasn't because of the writing. Like, it was still very well done. I just didn't like the main guy. And this is like a personal thing. I just thought he was a douche. That he was just... so he's the stepbrother of the guy from Longshot, who we love. I would literally marry him if he existed and proposed. But Jared, I was just like, no thank you. No thank you. Someone needs to slap you in the face and give you a good talking to, because this is not how we operate. No. And it's not like he did anything out and out offensive. I just didn't like him. Like, his mental dialogue, I'm just like, no, not for me. And so obviously it's very challenging to be in his mind for 50% of the book and still get the same enjoyment out of it. I actually did have another issue with that book particularly. So the love interest, Banner, she's described very early on as the fat girl. Like, he doesn't call her that, other people do. And she is very, very concerned about her weight. She's very aware of her body and how it's not the way she wants it to be. And so a big portion of the book is really like diving deep into diet culture, but she's very into it. Like, she counts her calories, she's obsessive about her workouts, she is like really just obsessed with being thin, and that's where she finds all of her confidence, that's where she finds all of her self-worth. And that to me is not something that feels good. I mean, I'm someone who, I struggled with an eating disorder when I was younger, and I've spent a long time really not liking the skin that I'm in. For a big piece of the story to be like, oh, it's okay, she gets her happily ever after because, you know, she lost weight and she's thin now. Like, that just didn't sit well with me. So all in all, like, that one I would say is more of a miss. I enjoyed it enough to sit and read it within like a day or two, but it didn't quite reach the heights of Longshot, which was very, very good. I will continue to read the rest of the series because I know which couples are going to be in book 3 and book 4. They're mentioned in the first one, and I really, really love them. So I think that I am going to enjoy those a lot more than Blockshot. Okay, next we have the final book that I managed to read for Readathon. So this one is a non-fiction, it's a memoir, In Order to Live by Yeonmi Park. And this is her story. She was born in North Korea. And this is her story of leaving North Korea, and you know, it's not as easy as you would think. But she talks about like growing up and how it was for her, ending up being trafficked into China, how she escaped that and found her way to South Korea. It's a very big story. So it feels wrong to say that I enjoyed it because it's not necessarily like a fun thing to enjoy. So that's not the right way to describe my reaction to it. But I was very, very immersed. I found it very, very interesting. I feel like I learned a lot because it's not necessarily a set of circumstances that I can relate to on a personal level, and especially because the history of the Koreas is not something that I know an awful lot about. It's not something that I ever studied. And like the relationship of China to surrounding countries, again, not something that I knew an awful lot about. So I feel like it was very well articulated and it felt very educational, because it gave you so much context and it didn't assume that you would know what was already going on, which is great because I really didn't. I thought it was written very clearly, very bluntly in some cases, even though a lot of the events that took place could have been like very emotional and very harrowing. The way that they were described was very matter of fact, so you didn't necessarily get that total battering of the heart with every other page, which was probably a good thing because I was listening at the gym and I would have probably just sat on the treadmill and not moved. But I would definitely recommend. I listened to the audiobook. It wasn't read by the author, which I do usually love. I love a memoir read by the author, but it was still a very good audiobook. And yeah, I'd recommend it. I think it's an important kind of thing to read. Because we do, in our Western bubble, we get so desensitized to the realities that other people face on a very, very day-to-day basis. Like, we take our freedom for granted because we've never lived another way. Even someone like me who, like, I've been through some really traumatic and difficult things, like the way that I was brought up. I wouldn't have necessarily said that I had freedom or freedoms, but in comparison to things like that, now I look back at my own life and I think, do you know what? Yes, I've gone through hard things, but it could have been way worse. Anyway, lots of thoughts on that one. I would highly recommend giving it a read, like I said, but I did have to read it slowly. It wasn't one of those ones where I just wanted to dive in and binge. And I don't know if that's just because of the mood that I was in March. Like, I wanted fun, light things, and that was not a fun, light book, but it was still good. Next, I read Next Year in Havana by Chanel Cleaton, and that's the March book club pick for my little book club that I'm in with a couple of friends. And I had a great time reading that. I talked a lot more about that in a reading vlog. So you may or may not see that at some point. But it tells the story of a young woman, a Cuban American lady, who is going back to Cuba to scatter her grandma's ashes. And then it tells this parallel story of her grandma in the 50s, around the time that she was exiled and had to move to Florida. And it's just, again, a really educational read. Even though it's fiction, I feel like it gives you so much like depth of knowledge and context to things that have been going on in different parts of the world. Now, unlike In Order to Live, this is a period and a location that I'd actually studied at school somewhat. So I actually did high school in Spain, and one of the things that we studied fairly extensively was the Spanish colonies, Cuba obviously being one. And so while I didn't necessarily study all of Cuba's history, there were elements that definitely reminded me of things that we'd learned at school, but it was told from a very different context, because we were learning from more of like a political, colonial, imperial context than a social context, which is what you get more of in the novel. And I appreciated the blanks getting filled in like that, because I remember when I was studying things, there were certain things that I was like, just why did this happen though? Like, this just makes no sense. But now, actually having read more about how the people actually felt about things was helpful. And then on top of just the educational side of things, it was a nice book, dramatic love stories, sad moments. It was a good read. I'll definitely be interested in reading the next book. I think they're like technically standalones, but they have overlapping characters. So looking forward to reading the next one at some point. Then I read Love or Duty by Rosie Harris, which was absolute trash, and I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Then I read All We Left Unsaid by Natalie K. Martin. I thoroughly enjoyed this one. I thought it was very, very, very good. It's the story of two sisters who have a falling out. And what we learn on the very first page is the younger of the two sisters dies, and they never had a chance to make up. So then the story moves through the past, I think 7 years. I think it's 7 years, and us like seeing them at different points along those 7 years, seeing like where they are in their relationship, what's going on, what they're thinking, like what they're experiencing, all of that leading up to the point where one of the sisters dies and the other one has to deal with, all the death stuff. Very, very good. Very good. Highly recommend. Characters brilliantly rendered. Story immaculately put together. It's just a really fascinating character study and a commentary on and not letting time pass you by, not always putting off reaching out to people and making amends. And it definitely made me think about some of the relationships in my own life. So yeah, that one was a great read. And then last but not least, ending on a high note, I read The Stopover by T.L. Swan. This is the first in the series. This is the first in the Miles High Club series, which is a Kindle Unlimited romance series about these 4 billionaire brothers and their respective love interests. I read it in one night. I read it last night and it was a delight. It was a lot of fun. The sex scenes were brilliant, apart from a couple of things that just made me laugh. But sex scenes do that to me. I either like get into it, skim it, or like cannot stop laughing. But all in all, really enjoyed that one. Definitely be continuing with the series, and that's all I have to say about that, to be quite frank. Anyway, there you have it. I feel like I've been talking forever. All 17 of the books that I read in March. A very like random selection, I have to admit. Lots of genres in there, lots of vibes in there. And even though I read such a big number of books, I never usually read this many, I feel largely dissatisfied by my reading month, which is silly. Like, I read so much and I did read some really good things, but for some reason I don't know, I didn't find so many new favourites this month. I would say that just looking at everything that I read this month, my favourites were probably Long Shot is a definite favourite. Number one book of March, Long Shot. I would say that Angel and Hannah is not something I will read again. It's not something I really enjoyed, but it's something that will stick in my mind for a long time, and it is something that I would recommend to other people. And then All We Left Unsaid, I would read that again. I would recommend it. And again, I think it's something that is going to just be in the back of my mind for a while to come. So do with that what you will. If you've made it this far, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Have you read any of the books that I mentioned in March? If yes, let me know which one your favourite was, or which one maybe you would like to read if you haven't. I don't know if I've been doing a very great job of convincing people to read anything. Probably not, because I'm still feeling kind of slumpy, but thank you for being here anyway. Like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you feel like it, and I will see you next time.